The morning my neighbor destroyed her brand new luxury SUV on 6 yellow steel posts sitting in my driveway. I didn't yell. I didn't gloat. I didn't even say I told you so. I just stood there with a cup of coffee in my hand and watched the steam from her radiator drift up into the Texas air like a quiet little victory. But to understand why that moment mattered so much, you have to understand something first. This wasn't an accident. It took 90 days to get there. And every single one of those days started the exact same way. My name's Daniel Brooks. I'm 44 years old, retired Army, and I live in a small brick ranch house on the east side of Frisco, Texas. Nothing fancy. Built sometime in the late 70s, back when houses were meant to be lived in instead of photographed for magazines. The driveway is cracked concrete, stained from years of oil changes and Texas summers. My truck's an old F-150 that's seen better days, but still starts every morning. I like things simple. A quiet street, a cup of coffee on the porch, maybe the sound of someone mowing their lawn on a Saturday morning. That's the kind of neighborhood this used to be. Then 2 years ago, the house next door got demolished. For about 6 months, there was nothing but bulldozers, cement trucks, and construction crews yelling over nail guns. When it was finished, the little ranch house that used to sit there had been replaced with something that looked like it belonged in a gated community somewhere. 6,000 square feet of white stone and glass. 4-car garage. Circular driveway. Tall iron gate. It stuck out on our street like a designer suit at a backyard barbecue. That's when the Callaways moved in. Evan Callaway was a personal injury attorney. The kind you see on billboards smiling like he just won the lottery. His wife, Lindsay. Well, she was the type of neighbor you notice before you even meet her. Always perfectly dressed. Always on her phone. Always in a hurry. And always driving this bright silver Mercedes SUV that probably cost more than my truck and motorcycle combined. Now, when they first moved in, I tried to be neighborly. Brought over a 6-pack, introduced myself, welcomed them to the street. Evan shook my hand, seemed polite enough. Lindsay barely looked up from her phone. Didn't think much of it at the time. People are busy. But about 3 weeks after they moved in, something strange started happening. Every morning at 8:10 sharp, Lindsay would pull her Mercedes out of their giant 4-car garage. She'd drive maybe 15 feet down the street, then park it sideways, right across the entrance to my driveway. At first I thought it was temporary. Maybe she was waiting for someone. Maybe a delivery truck was coming. But the next morning, same thing. 8:10, car across my driveway. Then the next day, and the next. Now here's the weird part. Her mailbox wasn't even near my house. It was about 40 feet down the street, directly in front of her own property. But instead of walking the short distance from her driveway like every other human being in the neighborhood, Lindsay had apparently decided that the most convenient place to stop her SUV was blocking mine. She'd park there for maybe 5 minutes, grab her mail, scroll on her phone, sometimes finish a coffee. Then she'd leave, and I'd finally be able to back my truck out. The first couple days I didn't say anything. Figured it would pass. By day 3, though, I caught her just as she stepped out of the vehicle. I walked over, friendly as I could be. "Hey, morning," I said. "Any chance you could leave my driveway clear? I usually head out around this time." She looked at me like I'd asked her to move a mountain. Then she shrugged. "It's a public street," she said. "I'm not parked in your driveway." Technically, she wasn't, but she was blocking it. I nodded, kept things polite. "Right, but I can't get out when you're here." Another shrug. "I'll only be a minute." Then she turned away and walked to her mailbox like the conversation was over. I stood there for a second watching her, then went back inside. Now, if you've spent any time in the military, you learn something pretty quickly. Not every battle is worth fighting right away. Sometimes you observe first. So I waited. Day 12 rolled around. Still happening. Every morning. Same exact time. Same exact spot. I caught her again as she stepped out of the SUV. "Hey, Lindsay," I said. "Still having trouble with the driveway thing?" She sighed like I was the one being unreasonable. "I told you. It's a public street." "Sure," I said, keeping my voice calm. "But you're blocking access to private property." She rolled her eyes. "You'll survive 5 minutes." Then she shut the car door and walked away again. That was the moment I realized something. This wasn't about convenience. It was about attitude. The kind that says rules apply to everyone else, but not to you. By day 28, I tried one more time. This time her husband was outside. Nice morning, birds chirping, sprinklers running, the kind of suburban peace that usually keeps everyone friendly. I walked up and explained the situation. Evan listened, nodding slowly. Then he smiled that lawyer's smile. You know, he said, street parking is perfectly legal in Texas. I'm aware, I replied. Then I'm not sure what the issue is. The issue, I said, is she's blocking my driveway. He tilted his head slightly. Well, technically she's not on your property. Then he gave a little shrug like the matter was settled. And that's when I realized something else. This wasn't just a careless neighbor. This was a lawyer who thought he already knew how the story ended. What neither of them knew yet was that the story had barely started. And about a week later, something arrived in my mailbox that turned a small neighborhood annoyance. About a week after that conversation with Evan, I opened my mailbox and found an envelope that didn't look like the usual electric bill or grocery coupons. It was thick, official, law firm letterhead across the top. I remember standing there at the end of my driveway, flipping it over in my hands for a second before opening it, because deep down I already knew exactly what it was. Inside was a formal notice. 3 pages of legal language explaining that any attempt by me to interfere with lawful street parking could result in legal action. There was a paragraph about harassment, another about property obstruction, and a final line that basically said if I tried to tow Lindsay's vehicle or place anything in the roadway, they'd see me in court. Signed neatly at the bottom. Evan Calloway, my neighbor. I stood there reading it twice, maybe 3 times, the paper rustling in the warm morning air, and then I just started laughing. Not angry laughing. More like the kind you get when someone underestimates you so badly, it almost feels like a compliment. 10 years in the Army teaches you a lot of things, but one of the big ones is patience. People think soldiers are hot-headed, charging straight into conflict. But most of the time the best move is the quiet one nobody notices until it's too late. So I folded the letter back up, walked inside, set it on the kitchen counter, and poured another cup of coffee. Because now this wasn't just a neighbor problem. Now it was a puzzle. And puzzles have solutions. The next morning, like clockwork, 8:10 a.m., Lindsay pulled up and parked across my driveway again. I watched through the front window, coffee in hand. No confrontation, no waving, just observing. And that's when something occurred to me. She kept saying it was a public street. Evan kept repeating the same thing. Technically correct, but they were both assuming something without actually checking it. Later that afternoon, I made a phone call to a local survey company. Now, if you've never hired a property surveyor before, it's not the most exciting purchase you'll ever make. Costs a few $100 and usually involves someone walking around your yard with a tripod and a measuring stick. But the thing about property lines is they're not guesses. They're recorded, exact, and sometimes they're not where people think they are. 3 days later, a guy named Marco showed up in a dusty pickup with a company logo on the door. Friendly guy, maybe mid-50s, sunburned neck, the kind of person who spent half his life outdoors measuring land. He set up his equipment in my yard while I stood nearby. So what's the situation? He asked. Neighbor dispute, I said. He chuckled. Half my jobs are. For about an hour, he moved around the front of the property, checking markers, jotting numbers on a clipboard, adjusting his tripod. Every so often, he'd squint down the line where my driveway met the street. Finally, he walked over. Well, he said, scratching his beard, this is interesting. That's never a bad phrase when you're paying for a survey. What did you find? I asked. Marco pointed toward the front of my driveway where the concrete met the street. Your driveway apron extends past the property line. Past, I said. About 18 inches. Now that might not sound like much, but legally it mattered. Because in Texas, the driveway apron, that little stretch of concrete connecting your driveway to the street, is considered part of the property owner's access point, which means blocking it can actually be classified as obstructing private access. Marco must have seen the look on my face because he smiled. You planning something? He asked. Just gathering information, I said. He laughed. Smart man. The official survey arrived a couple days later. Clean diagram, measurements, property boundaries clearly marked, and right there in bold numbers was the detail that changed everything. 18 inches. That was the difference between a street parking issue and someone repeatedly blocking my property. I set the survey next to Evan's letter on the kitchen counter. Then I made another phone call, this time to a contractor. The guy's name was Rick Turner. Local construction company, did a lot of driveway and commercial barrier work around the county. When he came by to look at the front of the house, I explained the situation. Rick stood there with his hands on his hips, studying the driveway. You want removable posts? He asked. I shook my head. Nope. He looked back at the survey papers I handed him. Permanent. Permanent. Rick grinned. Well, now that's my favorite kind of job. We walked over to the exact line Marco had marked earlier with a small metal stake. Rick measured it carefully. 6 posts would cover it, he said. 4-inch steel bollards. Powder-coated, bright safety yellow. How deep? 3 feet in the ground. Concrete base. You could drive a tank into these things, and they'd still be standing. I nodded. Perfect. He scribbled some numbers on a notepad. Whole job will run you about $3,200. Honestly, cheaper than I expected. But the best part wasn't the price. It was the timing. Soonest you could install them? I asked. Rick checked his phone. Couple weeks. I leaned against my truck thinking for a second. Then I asked the question that made him laugh out loud. What about early morning? How early? Before 8. Rick looked at me, then looked over at the neighbor's house, then back at me. Oh, he said slowly. This is that kind of situation. I didn't say anything. He just shook his head smiling. Tell you what, he said. I'll bring the crew out at 5:30 a.m. one of these days. And just like that, the plan was set. But here's the thing about plans. They only work if you keep them quiet. So the next 3 weeks went by exactly the same as the previous ones. Every morning at 8:10 Lindsay parked across my driveway. Every morning I waited. No arguments. No complaints. Sometimes I'd even wave. Which confused her a little, I think. Once she called out from her car window, "You finally over it." I just smiled. Something like that. Behind the scenes, though, everything was moving. Permits were filed with the county. Materials ordered. Concrete scheduled. And on the 89th morning since this whole thing started, Rick's truck rolled quietly onto the street while the sky was still dark. 5:28 a.m. His crew unloaded the equipment under the glow of work lights. Metal posts laid neatly on the grass. Bright yellow. Heavy. Immovable. Rick walked up to the porch where I was standing with a thermos of coffee. You ready for this? He asked. I looked at the empty street, then at the neighbor's quiet house next door. Oh yeah, I said. Been ready for about 89 days. The drills started humming. Concrete cutters whining against the pavement. Within minutes, 6 perfectly spaced holes were carved into the edge of my driveway apron. Steel posts slid into place. Concrete poured. Level checked. Bolts tightened. By 7:45 a.m. the job was done. 6 bright yellow steel bollards standing 36 inches tall along the edge of my driveway, like silent little sentries. Impossible to miss. Rick wiped his hands on a rag and stepped back to admire the work. Those'll outlive both of us, he said. I nodded. Good. He climbed into his truck and gave me one last grin before driving off. And then the street got quiet again. Birds chirping. Morning sun creeping over the rooftops. 7:58 a.m. I walked inside and opened the Ring camera app on my phone. Because I had a feeling the next 10 minutes were going to be memorable. At 8:09 that morning, the street looked exactly the way it had looked for the past 3 months. Quiet. A couple sprinklers ticking across lawns. Sun just starting to warm the pavement. Nothing dramatic. If someone had driven by at that moment, they probably wouldn't have noticed anything unusual, except maybe 6 bright yellow steel posts standing at the edge of my driveway, where empty space used to be. But the thing about habits is people stop seeing what's right in front of them. And Lindsay had been running the same morning routine for 89 straight days. At exactly 8:10, right on schedule, I saw her silver Mercedes turn the corner at the end of the block. I was standing in my kitchen, coffee mug in one hand, phone in the other, watching the Ring camera feed like it was the morning news. The SUV rolled down the street slowly, sunlight reflecting off the windshield. She was alone in the car, one hand on the wheel, the other holding her phone. And I remember thinking, for a split second, maybe she'll notice. Maybe she'll stop. Maybe today will be the day common sense finally kicks in. But then she started turning toward the curb. Same angle she always used. Same speed. Like muscle memory. And then it happened. Metal hit steel with a sound that echoed halfway down the block. Not a crash exactly, more like a violent crunch followed by the sharp hiss of something important breaking. Her front bumper slammed directly into the first bollard. The SUV jerked to a dead stop. The hood dipped forward, and within seconds a thin stream of coolant began dripping onto the concrete. Steam started rising in slow white clouds. I just stood there in the kitchen, silent, watching it unfold. Lindsay sat frozen behind the wheel for a moment like her brain was trying to process what the laws of physics had just done to her morning routine. Then the driver door flew open. She jumped out, staring at the front of the Mercedes like someone had moved the earth while she wasn't looking. "What the hell?" she shouted. Her voice carried clearly across the quiet street. She walked around the front of the SUV, hands on her head, eyes wide as she finally took in the 6 bright yellow bollards standing exactly where the open space used to be. And that's when she spotted me, standing calmly at the end of my driveway with my coffee. "You did this," she yelled. I took a sip before answering. "Installed them this morning." "You can't put things in the street." "They're not in the street," I said. "They're on my property." She looked ready to explode. "This is insane. My car is destroyed." Now, destroyed might have been a little dramatic, but the bumper was definitely crushed, and judging by the growing puddle under the engine, the radiator wasn't happy either. By this point, the noise had attracted attention. A couple neighbors stepped out onto their porches, and right on cue, the front door of the Callaway mansion swung open. Evan came jogging down the driveway, still in his suit pants, clearly halfway through getting ready for work. "What happened?" he called. Lindsay pointed at the bollards like they were wild animals that had attacked her car. "He put these here." Evan walked up, looked at the Mercedes, then looked at the steel posts. Then he turned to me. "You can't just install barriers in the roadway," he said sharply. I set my coffee cup down on the hood of my truck. "Well, good news," I said calmly. "I didn't." He opened his mouth to argue, and that's when I reached into my back pocket. There were 3 documents folded neatly together. I handed them to him one by one. First, the property survey. Second, the installation invoice from Rick's company. Third, the county permit approving the bollards exactly where they were installed. Evan's confidence faded a little more with each page. He read the survey twice, looked down at the driveway, looked back at the papers, and then something beautiful happened. He stopped talking. For the first time since this whole thing started, the attorney had nothing to say. Lindsay, meanwhile, was pacing beside the SUV. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "We're suing him." Evan didn't answer right away, because he already knew. This wasn't a lawsuit. This was evidence. I picked my coffee back up. "Have a nice morning," I said. Then I went back inside. 2 days later, the phone rang. Insurance company. They'd gotten Lindsay's claim and wanted my side of the story. Apparently, she'd suggested the posts were illegally installed. So I emailed them 3 things: the survey, the permit, and the Ring camera footage showing the moment her SUV drove directly into a stationary steel object. 48 hours later, they called back. Claim denied. Driver negligence. Not my problem. You'd think that would have been the end of it. But remember, this whole situation started with a legal letter. So I decided to respond in the same language. On day 95, a certified envelope arrived at the Callaway house. Inside was an itemized invoice. Vehicle damage related to private property obstruction, $21,800. Bollard installation and materials, $3,200. Property survey and legal consultation, $2,600. Total, $27,600. Payment terms included. Now here's where things got awkward for Evan. Because the earlier letter he'd sent me, the one threatening legal action, meant he'd already inserted himself into the dispute, which created a conflict of interest, meaning he couldn't legally represent his own wife in court against me. So a couple weeks later, a different attorney contacted me. Very polite, very professional. He suggested we discuss settlement options. I listened for a few minutes. Then I said something simple. "I'm not negotiating." Silence on the other end of the phone. Finally, he sighed. "Let me talk to my client." 31 days later, we signed an agreement. Lindsay would repay the full amount over 18 months, $27,600. There was also a recorded easement document filed with the county stating that my driveway access could never be obstructed again. Penalty for violation, $1,000 per incident, plus towing. Funny thing is, the Callaway house has a 4-car garage, plenty of room for their vehicles. And ever since that morning, Lindsay uses it. Every single day, those 6 yellow bollards are still there, standing in a straight line at the edge of my driveway like silent little monuments to a very expensive lesson. And sometimes when I'm out front watering the lawn, I'll see Lindsay drive past slowly, making very sure to keep her distance. Now I'll be honest, part of me almost feels bad about the whole thing. Almost. But here's the question I always come back to. If someone had politely asked you 3 different times not to block their driveway, would you have kept doing it? Or would you have just walked the extra 40 feet to your mailbox? Because 90 days is a long time to test someone's patience. So I'm curious what you think. Was installing those bollards the right move? Or did I take things too far? Drop a comment and let me know how you would have handled a neighbor like Lindsay. And if you've ever had a situation where someone thought the rules didn't apply to them, I'd love to hear that story too.